muddle there. That was caused by a sudden bereavement, which we have no control over. So I'd like to welcome you all, and I would like to welcome our great range of speakers to the webinar this morning. Guillem Canaleta from the Pau Costa Foundation, Mark Smyth from the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, and Matthew Bushby from the Mournes Heritage Trust. In the next couple of hours, we will gain an in-depth understanding of the history and practice, science and application of wildfire management as it has been experienced in projects across Ireland over the last few years. As I mentioned, this webinar is part of the CAN project, which is supported by the European Union's Interreg VA programme managed by the special EU programmes body. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping. At least on Zoom, I don't have to tell you where the emergency exits are, but we'd be grateful if you could remain muted while our speakers are talking. We'll have 3 opportunities for questions, one short one after the first speaker, one halfway through, and one longer one at the end. If you have any questions as the sessions progress, please feel free to write them in the Q&A function of your Zoom page. We'll be finishing with a panel session of all the speakers, which I feel will be very useful. The interactive part of this workshop is vital, so please do take part in these opportunities for discussion. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand on the Zoom function, which is on the bottom panel of your screen. I will unmute you, give you an opportunity to have your say, and then we'll put you back on mute again. So hopefully that will work, cross fingers. We will be recording this session and using this recording to write up the proceedings. So we will be taking a couple of shots of attendees for the funders. So if you'd rather your face didn't appear in those screenshots, please just turn off your video camera so you're not sitting there looking at your own face. So time for the main show, and over to the first speaker from Pau Costa, Guillem Canaleta. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Abby. I will share the screen first. Okay, I guess that all of you can see my screen. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for attending this meeting, this webinar. My name is Guillem Canaleta and I work at Pau Costa Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that is based in Spain and created in 2011, that is working mainly in wildfire management and wildfire ecology. Okay, I guess that most of you or some of you already knows us because these last years, and particularly these last 2 years, we have been actively working here in Ireland in the Quilco Mountains and Slieve under the framework of the CAN project, developing 2 different wildfire management plans in each of these protected areas. Okay, so my presentation today will have 2 main parts. The first one will be an overview of the current situation, the current scenario of the wildfire problem here in Europe, Ireland, and also examples of other parts of the world. And then in the second part, I will put the focus on how we develop these wildfire management plans and the methodology that we are currently using. Okay. So traditionally or historically, Europe have as the Mediterranean region as the main European region that burns during the summer. Okay, countries like Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, and Greece have almost 75% of the burnt surface annually in Europe. But this trend has been changing in the last decade, since we have seen very important and severe wildfire events in other European regions like Central Europe and Northern Europe, and particularly in Ireland as well in 2011 and 2017. And we can see that in these 3 figures here. The first one is the fire weather index under the current climate, okay, taking data from 1981 to 2010. And we can see that with 2 different climate projections, a global warming of 2 degrees and a high emissions scenario, we can see that in both cases, the fire weather index increases a lot in the British Isles and particularly in Ireland. Okay, so we expect an increase of the fire weather index in Ireland in the coming decades. In addition, with the climate change, we have seen different extreme events in other parts of the world. For example, in British Columbia, Canada, this summer, they are having an extreme heat wave. Actually, some weeks ago, several cities reached 50 degrees in Canada. Scientists cannot say that this is due to climate change, okay? Because without climate change, this kind of events occur there once every 1,000 years, more or less. But what we know, what scientists know, is that climate change shows that this kind of events will be more severe, so with higher temperatures. And apart from that, the returning period will decrease. Okay, so now it's 1,000 years. With climate change scenarios, we expect a returning period of only 10 years. Okay, so a heat wave that now occurs once every 1,000 years will occur 100 times every 1,000 years. And of course, this has posed a very challenging situation in regards to wildfires. Actually, the Prime Minister had to declare the state of emergency because 300 wildfires were burning at the same time, and 37 of them represented a major threat for public safety in the area. And having this information, I have a question, because a question comes to me, which is what would happen in case of having such a strong heat wave here in Ireland? I don't have the answer for that, but what several studies suggest is that heat self-ignition could be possible to 40 degrees. Okay, thanks to the oxidation process. And actually, this has been seen already in our area in Catalonia. 2 years ago, when a wildfire burned 5,000 hectares after the self-combustion of phases of a farm, thanks to the oxidation process due to the heat wave that the country was suffering in these days, that day. More things about the impact of climate change. This is a projection comparing the current against the climate in 2050 using the worst case scenario. In the field figures, you can see the current temperatures, maximum, minimum, and the rainfall, while in the strip figures, you can see the projections. And we can see a lot of things in this figure, but the main conclusion is that wildfires here in the UK will move from spring to summer, because you will have stronger summers with higher temperatures, particularly in August, July, and an important decrease in the amount of the monthly rainfall during summer. Okay, so we expect longer fire seasons, moving from spring to summer as well, and with strong and more complex fire behavior, since temperatures will be higher and rainfall will be lower. And using these projections, we have made, in the Quilca area last year, we made wildfire simulations, static simulations. We model the flame length and rate of spread of fires in the protected area, okay, and their current climate, where you can see that flame lengths are usually between 1 or 2 meters, no more, which is inside the extinction capacity, the suppression capacity, while the rate of spread, the current rate of spread, and the current climate and current management is expected to be almost in all the area between 300 and 500 meters per hour, being a little bit higher in some steep areas. While comparing these fire behavior outputs with climate change scenario, we see that in the case of flame length, there is going to be an increment of flame lengths for more than 2 meters ahead, particularly in more fire-prone fuel models and in steeper slopes. You can see the comparison in this image. And the same happens in the case of the rate of spread. We are having rates of spread below 500 meters per hour, while in the projection, we expect an increment up to 1 km/h, which will put the suppression system under a more complex scenario, of course. So in this image, you can see a recent wildfire we had here in Catalonia last week. It burned 400 hectares. But I would like to highlight two different things of this picture. The first one is the bottom part, where you can see that there is a lot of wild and urban interface without any preventive measure. Okay, it means that the fire service had to put a lot of efforts to protect people living here and had to forget about fire propagation occurring in this hillside. Okay, and the other part that I want you to focus in this picture is the upper part, which is this hillside terraces that 50 years ago used to be full of olive trees and vineyards. Okay, so plantations that do not burn. So 50 years ago, this fire couldn't have burned all of this slope here that you see in the image. But when they abandoned all of these plantations, hillside terraces, natural vegetation occupied the area, and now the fire has burned it all in just a few minutes. Okay, so this is just an example on how, on the one side, urban planning is key for the risk reduction, and also how an active rural sector is also key to limit the fire propagation and fire behavior. Okay. Considering that, we developed these wildfire management plans in Cuenca and Sliva and in other areas of Europe as well, considering these 5 principles that you can see in my screen. The first one is that due to economic difficulties, we cannot implement and integrate land management. Okay, that's why we focus on our strategic areas to identify according to the risk. So we identify these areas, analyzing the risk, and then we make cost-efficient decisions by choosing strategic areas that will have a higher impact on fire propagation. Then the second one is the practitioner knowledge and previous experience from other regions, so exchange of knowledge between regions. The third one is to have management plans as a starting point for the discussion, okay, in terms of risk assessment, wildfire risk reduction, and so on. The fourth one is to empower the fire community with tools to make better decisions. And the last one is the engagement of different range of stakeholders and integrate different values and visions in a wildfire management plan. Okay, this is because we are planning the infrastructures, but then people and stakeholders in charge of land management and fire management there have to implement and execute this plan. So it's important to make to achieve consensus and make common decisions and common agreements to later develop and execute the plan. And to finish with this part, I would like to briefly speak about the future trends that we see in the management planning, risk management planning, because in the different plans that we have been developing these last years, we have seen how we are every year more interested in finding synergies between biodiversity conservation and wildfire management. Okay, and to do that, what we try to do is to identify strategic areas in areas where we know that we will give an advantage to biodiversity as well, and assuming that a good ecosystem status will mean more resilience in terms of wildfire risk reduction, even in case of having a wildfire in the area, to help recovery faster after the fire, and to avoid having too many hectares burn in higher intensity that could really damage then the ecosystem. That's why we try to always find common decisions and synergies with conservation and preventive actions. Okay, and Then I will jump to the second part of the presentation, which is about the strategy and the methodology that we use in these fire management plans. Very briefly, plans are divided into two main phases. Okay, the first one, which is key, is the risk analysis. Okay, we try to understand what's the risk, so then we can go to the second phase, which risk management, so planning to address the risk that we have identified in the first phase. Okay, and now in the next few minutes, I will give you the overview of the process that we are currently implementing. That, by the way, it's always in parallel and course in parallel with an active stakeholder engagement. Okay, with all the stakeholders and agencies involved in the area in wildfire management, forest management, land management, and everything that could have an impact on wildfires. So one of the first things that we do is to identify the propagation patterns, okay, of the wildfires by looking at the historic fires of the area. Mainly we can have three different patterns: plume dominated, that are fires that move thanks to the high fuel load accumulation. We do not have these fires in Ireland yet. Then there are topographic fires, fires that move because they read the topography. We have fires like that in Ireland, but they are limited, so they do not represent a major threat usually. And the kind of fires that represent the major threat in Ireland are the wind-driven fires. Okay, fires that move thanks to the force of the wind, and we make the fire planning by considering these the wind-driven fires. Then in parallel, we assess the propagation patterns and the seismic situation. Okay, we have seen, after studying a lot of different fires in Ireland, that large wildfires only occur under two main seismic conditions. We call them type A and type B. Type A is the worst one, and it consists in a high pressure system located in the north of the British Isles. Okay, and that brings warm, dry, and strong winds to Ireland, because a high pressure system rotates clockwise here in the northern hemisphere, and that poses very fire-prone conditions in Ireland. This is the worst situation. And then we have type B, which is a high pressure system located over Ireland. This is also a critical situation, but not as much as type A, because in this case we have sunny weather, dry weather, but without strong winds. And that's the main difference between type A and type B conditions. That's why type A is more risky. And for example, two wildfires, one in Quilca and the other one in Smyth, both in May 2017, occurred under type A situation with a wind-driven pattern. Okay. Then we have we also then compare the fire regime under current and future climate. Okay. Mainly, we can say that under climate change, fire regime will change a little bit. We will have, as I mentioned, longer fire seasons moving from spring to summer, with more extreme fire weather due to the higher temperatures and lower rainfall. That's why we expect larger fires with more extreme behavior, with higher flame lengths and faster propagation rates, and also with the possibility of having a spotting phenomenon due to strong winds and the accumulated drought and accumulated fuel. Okay, and for example, here you have an aerial picture of the Smyth fire in 2017. You can see that the smoke column indicates the low intensity of that fire because of the low density of the smoke plume, and because it is light. Okay, it's mainly white. While only 1 year later, in Winter Hill in England, there was this large wildfire that burned 800 hectares. And you can see the difference in the smoke column, because here in the second case it's darker and more dense than in the first case. You can see the difference in both images, which indicates higher fire intensity. Then another key step is to identify the critical points. Okay, these points are topographic areas in the study site that represent a threat for the fire, because we expect an increase of the fire behavior, or an increment of the burning potential that the fire could have. For example, in mountain passes, we expect an increment of the wind speed and the speed of the fire. In the ravine nodes, we also expect an increment of the potential area to be burned because of the fire burning in the bottom of the ravine, and then in the node, it can split into two different fronts, so increasing the potential. And the same happens in case of ridge nodes, because the fire burning along the ridge, and once it gets to the node, it can get split into two different fronts. So this is the example of Quilca. All the important critical points that we identified, mainly all of them were ravine junctions due to the topography. Despite here in Ireland, the most critical points are mountain passes and ridge junctions rather than ravine junctions. And why these critical points are important? And then these critical points are terrain analysis. Okay, so together with the terrain analysis, discontinuities like roads or rivers and historical fire patterns, we can identify what we call potential polygons. Okay, potential polygons are spatial units in which fire behavior is expected to be homogeneous. So once the fire gets into a polygon, we expect the same fire behavior and the capacity that the fire can burn it all, okay, if we do not do anything. This is the case of Quilca. All the potential polygons that we identified using this methodology, critical points, discontinuities, and the propagation pattern. Okay, and why is this important? Critical points are important because on the one hand, they allow us to see the potential of the fire, okay? Once the fire gets started, we know in advance the potential this fire has and where we can find the opportunities in the limits of the polygons. And then it is key, this polygons methodology is key to check where we can identify the strategic areas. In this scheme or this figure, each number represents a polygon. And by using the Campbell prediction system, which in the end it's only a methodology developed by Doug Campbell that considers the main three fire forces, which are aspect, slope, and wind. So we represent as red arrows when the pass from one polygon to the other is in full alignment of these three forces. Pink arrows when there are 2 out of 3 of these forces, and blue arrows when there is only one of these 3 main forces of fire propagation. So if we know that we have here 2 red arrows in a row, we know in advance that it's very worth it to implement a strategic area here between the polygon 41 and 42 in this case, so that we can avoid propagation from this polygon to this one, and the same happens in this case. So in the end, it's a way to limit fire propagation in advance by implementing a strategic infrastructure. That's why we use this polygon methodology. And finally, these are the final strategic areas that we identified in Quilca mountain. You can see in the green circles, these are just safety areas surrounding Sitka spruce plantations. And then we also identified anchor lines or anchor points in green, and you can see 4 of them here. And then the strategic areas in strip figures along the study area. You can see that most of them are located in the east part rather than the west. This is because we know that large wildfires that have the potential to burn the protected areas will come from the east, because they come thanks to eastern winds. So in order to avoid and save burning potential, we decided to implement more strategic areas in the eastern than in the west part of the study site. So this is the planning, okay, that we identified last year. And now the challenge, of course, is to pass from planning to execution, okay? And that's why in the next presentations, Matthew and Mark will give us a speak and a presentation on what they are doing in their areas and the work they do. So yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Okay, we've had one question from Thomas Smyth written in the Q&As, and he says, we found that fire behaviour in heather fuels has a poor relationship with most components of the Canadian FWI. What fuel model are you using for the modelled increase in rate of spread and flame length? And which component of fire weather, e.g. fine fuel moisture, is the main driver for those increases?
Yeah,
we can let Thomas speak to you if he'd like to raise his hand.
Well, the fire weather index that we see in Ireland is that it's true that fire weather index for Ireland, it's not very realistic. I mean, some of large wildfires in Ireland occur under a moderate danger fire weather index, or even low weather index, the Canadian index I'm talking about. Then for simulations, yeah, there is no fuel models for peatlands. Okay, so we had to manage to adapt habitats to fuel models. That's why we had a person here in Ireland, David Wilson, that was in the field and taking pictures and measuring the fuel height and of the different vegetation, Kaluna, blanket bog, and so on. And with that, we assign a fuel model of a Scott and Burgan list to each habitat of the study areas. Okay, that's how we managed to make the fuel models for the simulations. And yeah, the main driver of the simulations is the wind, because the topography is not so abrupt in the area, and it is clear that the wind is the main force that that displays the fire behavior and flame length and propagation rate. Yeah, and in addition, we use in the case of Kulka, we used the fire in May 2017, and we are doing the same right now in Smyth, and we are using another wildfire there to calibrate the program, the software, okay, by using the real data of temperature, relative humidity, and the wind of the day that those fires occur to calibrate the model. And we can say that despite the models, the fuel models are not specifically for Wilka and Smyth, and they display the very realistic fire behavior.
Can I comment, Abby, if that's okay as well? Guillem, we've been very aware for the Mournes project that had been an identified issue. And Tom, you'd spoken about this previously with your involvement with us. And I think it's something we're very mindful of. And I think it's part of our experience is that you need to, as Guillem is saying, you need to continue to develop the learning and understanding of your specific sites as things go forward. So you've got to take what you can and what tools you've got. But absolutely, we need to continue that sort of more better understanding of our landscapes and our habitats and our heather or peat soils or whatever, and how they respond in fire. and more modeling. And, you know, the resources that are available to do that, we keep coming back to this thing, which we'll be talking about further on. There have been some PhD projects we've had an opportunity potentially to, but it's so hit and miss with that sort of thing. We need something a little bit more robust, brought in much more structurally about doing more detailed research in our particular areas. Because one size doesn't fit all. It does in some ways, but we also need to be a bit more informed.
Have we any more questions from anyone just about what Guillem has said there? If so, raise your hands. Otherwise, we'll pass on to the next session, which will be Matthew and Mark speaking about 10 years of wildfire management in the Mournes. If you think of any questions that you want to ask Guillem, just put them into the next chat session. So we'll move on to the next session. Okay.
Okay, so Abby, I'll share my screen now. Okay, so folks, thanks very much. Thank you, Abby and Cam, for organising this and giving us the opportunity. Whilst the title there, I know in the webinar, was Wildfire Planning and Management in Ireland, you know, this is very much specific to a particular project within Ireland. Obviously, it's not, we're not talking for everybody on a full programme here, and that's something that hopefully we could develop further in a follow-up webinar, particularly Kieran Nugent and other people, Fergal Monaghan as well, projects like that. But anyway, there's an opportunity for us, I suppose, in the context of what Guillem was saying, how then we have tried to deliver this on a local level, where we've very little understanding of wildfire apart from trying to respond to them. So not just, I know everybody knows really where we are, but I suppose it sort of highlights how tiny we are in the Mournes, southeast corner of Northern Ireland. So in the context of the global situation that Guillem very well outlined there, and we're all aware of, you know, and I've been reading recent things that, you know, the world's up in flames, you know, Siberia, places there were never fires before happening. And as Guillem's saying, more repetitive fires, California, all this thing constantly happen. Where does the Mournes experience sit in all of this, you know, in our tiny little area? And I think that's something that we're trying to come to terms as well, about what expectations we can build or going forward in any of the work that we've been doing. So I just want to share this video, and hopefully this will come up. If someone can shout to me if it doesn't work, but it just sort of sets, I suppose, where we are now. It's particularly to do with the Donald fire. Now let me just double check. Excuse me here. I'm going to come out of this because I want to make sure I have my sound shared. I'm not sure if I can do that here.
Do you want to try that anyway, Matthew, and see if
I will try it and see how we get on. Oh, here we go. Sorry. There we go. Okay.
For the most part, we find that those fires are started deliberately, and that's been our experience over many years. We have a dedicated wildfire lead officer. Those officers have additional experience, additional training, and bring significant knowledge and experience to the response to an incident. At the Mournes, there were 6 of those officers at that particular incident, along with the wildfire lead officer.
looking at the base of this gorse stem, you can see about 15 to 16 young gorse shoots all growing from the unburnt stem underneath the ground. We're certainly seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fires, but it's the impact on the habitats, the impact on the soil, the impact on the water, the impact on the air that you and I are breathing, and our kids are breathing, the water that we're drinking, the food that we're eating. If we want people to look after these places and make them better for us all, to deliver clean water, clean air, to deliver the biodiversity, to deliver the mammals that we want to see in these places, to hold on to the carbon, then we've got to start an active management strategy.
Okay. Let me get back into this. So I think that sort of sets out very well really where we are with this, that there's still a lot to do. And obviously, some of you will know Vince McAlinden. He's a local outdoor educator, member of Mountaineering Ireland, and just what he brought to that as well about the issues. Okay, so I suppose just this pictogram, I'm just showing, I suppose, where we are with the activities that happen really across Northern Ireland. Is the national level. We have the Northern Ireland Strategic Wildfire Group, which we're hoping are really getting going now, and this strategy, Mark's going to talk about that later. And under that, the stakeholder forum really was established in 2012 after the 2011 fires. And then local areas, really, we've got the Mournes, Belfast Hills, and then obviously with the CAM project with the Fermanagh and Cavan, and then Fermanagh and Tyrone and Monaghan projects are really the main thing. There have been other activities going on where, you know, the local AMB bodies, other bodies have been looking at developing wildfire groups, but that's primarily where the main activity has been. And in the Mournes, we've had the Mournes Wildfire Group, which was established in 2014 following the 2011 or 2013 report, which we'll come on to. And then there's been a Mournes Post-Fire Working Group, which was established just after April, after the Donald fire, and came from the council-led emergency response panel. And is that running currently parallel with the Mournes Wildfire Group? And then Northern Ireland Water are looking at developing a High Mournes working group to look at a holistic management framework for their land, which is 3,000 hectares, the majority of the Eastern Mournes. And that could really take things forward. With Belfast Hills, it's primarily been done through the Belfast Hills Partnership and the wildfire stakeholder group, looking at mapping, monitoring, habitat management and PR work. And then obviously with the CAM project, Guillem's highlighted those initiatives. So just the journey where we've really been in the Mournes. The Safe and Mournes Partnership was established in 2004 and in response to fires, including one that was costing Northern Ireland Water £250,000 up by Silent Valley, a reservoir in the Mournes, in their extra treatment work following a relatively small fire. And then from that and other fires, there was the 2011 fires and the catalyst really to sort of try and do something a little bit more coordinated. The interdepartmental group established at that point too, chaired by Northern Ireland Environment Agency, but this was still an informal group. The Eastern Mournes project really then took hold in 2012, which was the three funders, Environment Agency, Northern Ireland Water and Fire and Rescue Service, supported by Mournes Heritage Trust, which they commissioned Wildfire Advisory Services. And in 2013, the Eastern Mournes Wildfire Report was issued, which was, let's say, a more basic version of the report that Pau Costa have done for Quilcoat and Slieve Bay. It was an initial type of plan which has been developed further. Same basis though. We then, through 2015, 2016, have been trying to develop our understanding, links internationally, what's been going on, best practice, both from the wildfire community, but also on the habitat and biodiversity side as well, to bring those two disciplines together and see how we go forward. And then we've been looking at, again, more joint agency development, continuing that 2017, 2018, leading then to, in effect, a commitment across the government departments that they need to come together to develop a strategy. We've had a review of the Mournes report, which we'll come to, which has been very useful. And then the final one, really, again, the trigger was the fire on Donard in April this year, which really galvanized interest, particularly from ministers, which we think is going to be a bit of a game changer. Okay, so 2011 fires, huge impact. I'm not going to read all of these out, but as people have known before, it was, again, a significant incident across the whole of Ireland. And particularly, Mark, just to say, maybe at one point, all fire appliances bar one were out.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Matthew. It was our busiest period in our history. It was around those 7 or 8 days over the May Day and bank holiday.
So here's the Mournes, the High Mournes, and this is what happened in 2011. And this is Slieve Lamagan, and then this was the aftermath. So it made us all sit up and try and come together for a way forward. And again, as I mentioned just earlier, this was the Eastern Mournes Wildfire Report with the funding bodies there and ourselves as the support body, and Wildfire Advisory Services as the consultant. The key things that they were tasked to do was to establish an understanding of the wildfire risk, look at land management to limit that fire intensity in the worst case scenarios, to review the wildfire response capacity, and to improve collaborative approach. Again, Mark, is there anything there just to add on that?
No, I think that sums up the four main elements that we were looking at, Matthew, as we went through that report and to bring it out. And we have now seen benefits, which we'll talk about later, of having those as the targets we were looking at during our report.
From that, then we established the Mournes Wildfire Group. The senior business team there is basically the funders. So that's Northern Ireland Water, Environment Agency, and Fire and Rescue Service, with the chair as Mournes Heritage Trust. And then the three areas to try and cover those themes that you just saw in the last slide were prevention, which is primarily land management, which have been led by Northern Ireland Water as a subgroup lead. The protection, which is more stepping back and looking at the overall plan, risk, ongoing risk, training, raising awareness, which was led by Environment Agency Service, and the intervention, obviously the wildfire response, and clearly that's been led by Fire and Rescue Service. The wider stakeholders that we have would be Slieve Guillem, AOMB body, the local council, National Trust, Forest Service, CDP, particularly within NIEA, the farming unions and PSNI, and others as the case may be as we go through the different years we've had. We tend to meet once to twice a year. So the report basically then set these scenarios out, and it's as Guillem said earlier, you've got the high risk easterly, dry easterly winds coming in, and then still dangerous, but the lesser sort of pattern B, which is more, say, not dry air, but air coming in partly over the over the sea as well. So it's not quite as bad as the other. So the modeling is key for us, and this again, whilst there are potential issues in exact fire spread models, it still gives us a good understanding. There's our topography of the Eastern Mournes, 7,000 hectares. Scenarios with fire started on the east side there at Bloody Bridge. Some people may know that. The lower wind speed scenarios, the fire spread. The red is basically 100% cover, and then leading up to the pink, which is 5% chance of it going that far. But if you then move to that worst case scenario, the risk is this. And for us, really that made us sit up, because that's actually the whole of the Eastern Mournes special area conservation, designated habitat. So, you know, it's not like, oh, well, there'll be bits more than that done. It's basically the risk is everything. So you could either sort of run away from that, I guess, and think you can do nothing, or with this process that Pau Costa through the Wildfire Advisory Services, because they were the main wildfire analysts in that group, they looked at fire paths. Well, no, look, let's be more informed about this. So we started to look at where these runs would happen then, and then bring in the compartmentalization of the habitat of the landscape, which Guillem showed earlier. And then on the ground, this is really what it is. So this is the same area that I showed you. Slieve Donard is up there at the top, and Newcastle is just to the right of the picture, and the coast there below you. And this is a recommended control plot where the fire would be coming up from where you would have a lot of fires, often started deliberately, a lot of wild camping, gorse management in the bottom area, and the fire would drive up that valley. And if we manage the vegetation in that light blue shaded areas, it would push the fire into different alignments, which gives you an opportunity to try and intervene and to slow that fire down. Now, the thing is, you're given that, but we have very, very little knowledge about really what fire does, or what more broader activities are being done with regards to responding to fire, wildfire, and particularly the impacts on habitat. So we needed to go out and suss out what's happening here. So first thing that we did actually was that we did surveys of those control plots that were recommended, and there was about 7 or 8 of them, taking up about 2% of the whole of the special area conservation in the Eastern Mournes. And we did phase 2 surveys. We then did management plans for those areas. And you can see the pictures there looking at the eroded peat hags in some of these areas. And the bottom picture was really showing where we've done some intervention work to try and raise the water table, reprofile some of those very steep exposed peat hag edges, and try and build a bit of resilience into there, and learn from others. So Moors for the Future, they've been doing a lot about wildfire and restoration of heathlands, came over and did some training and demo work with us, and has been really important underpinning a lot of what we've been doing. Similarly, we needed to know more about what's happening with wildfire and how other agencies are managing the risk. And the risk is often termed managing fuel loads, which I know can be a contentious word in a way, fuel, because a lot, fuel is habitat as well, an important habitat. But in some ways, if you take it simply about what fire does, it's looking for fuel to burn. So we went to Catalonia under a training program, which was certified by the Catalonian Institute. And this is some of us initially, Steve Gibson in the middle, someone would know there from Northumberland Fire and Rescue Service, or he was on the left there from Pau Costa. Tom Smyth, you're in the chat today. Tom's there on the right, wearing his Australian gear because he'd been out there. So we've got a real mix of people participating. I was out there with Brian Irvine from Fire and Rescue Service, who was very much a driver of the need within organizations, and particularly within Fire and Rescue Service, to take this seriously and learn from best practice. Bottom right photo is following a prescribed burn that we were doing in understory woodland vegetation, so showing how controlled you can do it. And then sharing on the bottom left is working through what we called a FRISK project, which was about forest resilience, looking at not just fire, but storms and disease. And this was a trip we had in Barcelona looking at programs there. So we decided we needed to get on and learn about implementing some of this work on these controlled areas. This is an initial prescribed burn we did on one of these sites. You'll see in the distance a fire appliance or fire tender. There's hoses and pumps all around here, making sure there's a water ring. This was the early days, Mark, and you can even see maybe a tanker there full of water as well. We really brought in belts and braces to control this. Any thoughts on that initial picture, Mark?
I think when we look at this initial picture, you can see even from the PPE that people are wearing, and during this period, we learned a lot about prescribed burning and doing it safely. And we did, as we always do, we always have our safety aspects in place. But you can see we had a lot there when we were initially starting off, Matthew, and how it's developed into. I think you're going to show us what it looks like now. Then,
so there, Mark, as well. So in this picture on the bottom left, we just now have a a Land Rover and an Argo, all-terrain vehicle. We don't have a fire appliance there now. You know, things have changed. We've learned a lot about how to do this in a careful way. Low intensity burns, quick burns across the top, doesn't burn down into the sphagnum moss or the peat soils. So your plants are still alive. And here, just the PPE Mark mentioned, you know, instead of the boiler suits we had originally, this now is, you know, specialist PPE and tools such as the drip torch you can see there as well. So very controlled, very calm, very much following the model of the training that we'd learnt, particularly in Catalonia. And that builds confidence between the teams, very much between Fire and Rescue and us, Mark, going forward.
I think it's been a great example. I was just going to say, Matthew, that where we have a joint response, and this is then grown into training together. And not only do we train together, now we respond together, and we have this collaborative working. And I know for us in Northern Ireland around the Mournes project, out of that came then for us responding in across Northern Ireland. We do that together and work with landowners, work with Environment Agency and many of the other agencies to actually respond. And what that does for us, it gives us a joint decision making, gives us an informed decision whenever we go to manage, and whatever tool we use, whether it's fire, whether it's water, whether it's beating or it's flailing or whatever tool we use in response, at least we can do that together at an informed decision. So it's been good, Matthew, from that. It's been very beneficial for us as a service.
So I suppose, Mark, then just coming to this, one of the key learnings has been about not just in managing land, but also responding to fire, Mark. So this is a fire at Bands Road, some of you would know, Loch Shannon area, which was April last year, which had the potential to spread possibly as big as that big red map that you saw earlier across that western part of the Eastern Mournes. So Mark, this was a tactical use of fire then at that location?
This was a tactical use of fire. We had assessed it, looked at it, and we had an opportunity to stop the fire going right up through the Mournes, as you say, Matthew. Struggling to get, we didn't have aerial support to drop water on it, struggling to get all the resources there that we needed to get right along the line. I think it was about a 1.2 kilometre fire front at that stage, going up through the Mournes and burning very rapidly. So we did make the decision to do a tactical burn, but that was only on, you know, the years of practicing, looking, training with Pau Costa, working with yourselves, that we had the confidence to do that and to nip this fire very, very quickly. And for me, a bit of a small area being burnt back into the line of the fire then saved a great deal of the ecology and the habitat up across the centre Mournes. And as you've seen from the maps earlier, if it was taken off up into the centre Mournes, very challenging situation for us as a fire service. And so we see great benefits from using the tactical use of fire, but it will be very much risk assessed whenever we go to use it.
There are other techniques. I mean, you know, for what we've found in managing, obviously gorse is a huge issue, but just burning it can leave just all these basically high risks stems that would catch fire again. So, you know, you maybe need to look at mulching areas. Grazing's been a key tool for us. And again, through that landscape partnership project I mentioned, we were able to very much look at how we're using grazing. Some of these areas, this is at Silent Valley. We use sheep. And then following year, we've used cattle, Galloways, breeds that are obviously useful for the mountain work. So, and very much monitoring, you know, very bespoke, because, for example, you can see Molinia grass coming back into the left there after a prescribed burn. And obviously we don't want to tip the habitat to unfavorable condition, and especially area conservation, which is important for its wet and dry heath. Too much Molinia would be a detriment to that. So it's how we could use the grazing to hold back that Molinia regrowth, which can come back and dominate in areas that are prone to fire and repeated fire. So we were very successful actually there. If you get the sheep in very early after the Molinia starts to come, it's still palatable to them. If it's left for a while, they won't eat it at all. And then the combination of using cattle. So in these pictures, they're separate, but I think ultimately the best use is working them together, which has been a traditional use of livestock in upland areas. And obviously from Guillem's picture earlier about abandoned or land change, this is something we need to come back to, where maybe, for example, bracken spread is obviously often where you don't have that heavier livestock in upland areas as well. that could be a beneficial thing. Showed earlier about some of the heathland restoration. This is working with volunteers just to reprofile peat areas, using coir bunds to hold water back. And with wildfire, this again just raises water table, gets more water in the soil, and provides additional resilience as well. Sharing, working with stakeholders, we brought back the knowledge that we had. Top 2 pictures are working in Fermanagh with a group of farmers and forestry personnel, and Kieran from the south as well came up, showing, you know, safer ways of maybe if they're going to burn, and not just setting light and walking away to areas or hoping for the best with a diesel knapsack sprayer maybe. Top right is we had a demonstration of just fire patterns, really what fire does, different scenarios. And again, there we had Environment Agency, farming unions, other landowners, National Trust, back at Silent Valley, which thanks to Northern Ireland Water, we've been able to develop as a training area for wildfire. Bottom left is Norway, which was 2014 in January. And we did a study trip up there. I was able to link up with Alex Held and Pau Costa Foundation and Kieran to go up and have a look at their difficulties that they're having now. No one would think that you'd have fires in Norway in the fjords in January, but they're having that now. And then bottom right, obviously just training, showing the different use of pumps to the same stakeholder groups. Sleeve Donard, as we mentioned earlier and you saw in the video, was another game changer. So significant incidents are really important. They need to be a catalyst for a joint response. We need to seize the opportunities these give us, implement practical actions around them, and then evidence what we've done. So we did that in 2011, and now we're doing that with this fire. Showed the benefits of the joint working that we had that helped in this fire, but also the limitations that we can only do so much. However, as you saw earlier in the video, there is now funding because of ministerial interest with this on looking at let's say a review of the Mournes plan and a more detailed management plan for the Mournes and wider area, the area of the Western Mournes now as well, and a particular recovery plan for that site in question. Mark, anything on that one from yourself, just on how you saw the response?
We could take a whole webinar just on how we manage this. But what was great about this incident, if you can say there's anything great about any incident, was with 15 different agencies working together at our managed through our command point and our control point as a fire service, working with the community, working with many of the voluntary groups in the area, from supporting firefighters with food and supplies, to police service, environment agency, yourselves supplying us with transport to get firefighters up a mountain quicker, to Coast Guard coming in and giving us an aerial view of the site. It was as good an example as we have had of a full interagency approach, and that has only come from, again, the report and from the wildfire management planning that we have been doing since 2011, 2012. So I suppose the encouragement here is, where can this take us to in the CAN project that we're doing at the moment? And to me, this was the ultimate outcome and benefit of all the work we've been doing over the last 10 years. So yeah, there were great benefits, Matthew, from this.
Funny to say about a fire, a picture like that, there's benefits, but that's it. You seize the opportunity to demonstrate that and move forward. This couple more slides, guys. This photo is basically raises some of the issues that we've still got to come to terms with as a community. This is Sleeve Donard is to the right, and this is a key gateway you can see with the light blue shaded areas. The top areas of coal between Sleeve Commodore and Sleeve Beg, and it's got Rackametrian moss, it's montane heath, it's a really important part of the special area designation, special area conservation, a very steep slopes. And there was the real concern, if we do management in that area as highlighted with the light blue, that it would cause more damage than any benefits. So the hatched sort of purpley area below is areas that we were looking at, maybe if we did management there with the vegetation to reduce the height and continuity of the vegetation, if that could act as doing the same in slowing the fire down as the area above it in the light blue would do. We've done further surveys on that area, and there's the question Tom raised, and we talked with Guillem. We need to know about the habitat in that area to understand the fire pattern and fire flow there, rerun the fire models if we move that control area from there. But I suppose just something to say is that the Donald fire in April there, if you can see my cursor, I don't know if you can, guys, but to the right-hand side, this is Slieve Donald, and the fire came up pretty close to this saddle here. And if it had come across, the issues could be that it would have skipped up here and gone along through this gateway and not been coming up through this purple area. So I suppose this purple area could be extended to that crossroads at the right. So we need to be very, very clear about what the risks are and keep reviewing it in subsequent incidents and keep trying things and learning. Part of the issue here, as we said there, is this debate between, ecological management and wildfire mitigation, and using words such as fuel loads and only seeing vegetation as fuel from one side. And this is where we really need to move forward and look at a cohesive plan of what's acceptable, what's not, and pilots as well. And obviously burning on deep peat for vegetation control is utmost in the discussion with that as well. The review that was done, funded by Northern Ireland Water, of the Mournes report and the project that we've had, which you've just highlighted here, basically said the Mournes Wildfire Group, and I suppose the Mournes project, would benefit greatly from national guidance, support and resourcing, as well as the development of a national standard for effective wildfire management. And most significantly, a Northern Ireland-wide strategy is needed to drive the objectives and the tasks of the Mournes Wildfire Group moving forward. And that's really passing over now to what Mark will lead on the next part. So I don't want to dwell too much on that. I suppose just one other thing to say, and that's a nice tranquil picture. But one of the issues is that we feel that we've achieved a huge amount. We've learned a lot. There's still issues there. We maybe haven't done everything right, but we're learning quickly. But in some ways, it's all been about champions within organizations, boxing clever, using resources that you might have, or using short-term funding, end-of-year funding. But what happens is you tend to raise expectations of what you can achieve, and you get to a certain point, you can't go any further. And we're very mindful of what has happened for us, and really what plans are being set out for Quilca, Slieve Bay and other areas across Ireland and beyond. And the challenges that are going to be coming in, it's going to be more difficult. So I think that's a model that we've used, but it's not going to work going forward. You need this strategy really, and that resourcing and that proper coordination to really facilitate what has to be done, I think, going forward. So that's me. I will stop sharing the screen, and if there's any questions or chat, please go ahead.
Right, I had one question which was asked during your talk there, Matthew. Just find out where it is. Here we go. It's from M. Bruce. The phenomena of winter drying associated with frost has been researched by Matt Davies in Scotland and Torgrim Login in Norway. Sorry, Torgrim Lug in Norway. The winter drying process creates challenges for any FDRS and challenges cultural assumptions about wildfires only occurring in the summer. So what would your comments be on that there, Matthew and Mark?
Well, I mean, Michael, we agree totally. This is a different scenario. Again, a game changer. No one would really have thought this. So the winter drying is a key thing. And that's actually something that we see with our fire behavior, because it tends to be the end of winter into the start of spring, where the plants are desiccated. And our fire period is that here in Northern Ireland or Ireland and UK. And a lot of that is to do with that dry vegetation. So, and as Michael's saying there, that scenario is playing out, and you're getting them winter fires as well, and particularly as we saw in Norway. So it's a developing trend. Guillem, you probably see that as well. And it is how we respond to that. I mean, then what we're looking at is now a much wider area that these may happen, and a season.
I think probably, Michael, good to see you, or good to hear from you. I'm glad you're here. And yeah, we would be in agreement with you as well, completely. But what we're starting to see, not only are we having winter fires, we're actually starting to have summer fires here in Northern Ireland. And we have the last couple of years. Last weekend, we had a very busy weekend of a couple of large gorse fires and forest fires here. And yes, very challenging. I get the point. It's very challenging for the fire and rescue service. But this is why we need a joint approach to this, because actually, I would actually say, Michael, it's an even bigger challenge for other agencies about how we manage our land and we prevent, because prevention is much better than response. And it's how we start to put preventative measures in to ensure that when they do take off, that they don't take off very big and they don't spread everywhere. So there's many challenges for many agencies in this, Michael, and I totally agree with you. It does become very challenging for us as a fire and rescue service to deal with these incidents as they spread throughout the year, and not just in the spring that we were used to up until the last 3 or 4 years, you know. So yeah, thank you for the question. It was a good one. Yeah.
I've a little question myself, just briefly, just from somebody who's pretty much a beginner with all this. The spring fires are because the greenery hasn't started to come up, and you've still got the dry winter stuff, but no greenery. Is that right? So why are the summer fires happening? Is it just because of increased temperatures, or what?
All of the above, yeah.
All right.
Really, Mark, Guillem?
Well, I mean, I'm no scientist or ecologist, but I'm really a firefighter who puts out fires. Whenever they appear, we go and put them out, Abby. But we're starting to see, and maybe Michael could come in. Michael's done a lot of research in this, I know he has, or someone else could come in and talk about the probably the soil moisture content and Matthew has said about the other programs that they're running to try and keep the wetness there and what have we. So the ground's drying more. We're getting longer periods of dry periods. We're getting longer periods of wet periods, and it's impacting. And for us as a fire service, not only on wildfires, but we're talking about flood this week and looking at flash floods coming after the ground's been so dry, and we have a thunderstorm warnings coming in at us. So it's very challenging. But I think Matthew has hinted at why that's happening and what preventative action they're trying to take from an environmental and ecology perspective, you know.
Yeah. So Mr. Bruce says, you know, yes, like 2018, the longest fire seasons ever, with both spring and summer fire seasons, and possibly also obviously winter. We're just looking at fire all through the year.
I think, Abby, to put that into perspective, I think our first reasonably large gorse or wildfire across the UK was in February that year, and I think it went on through into November. I'm sure Michael maybe knows the stats better than me across the UK, but yeah, that was an extremely long season, but we are starting to see it. I mean, I was talking to my chief fire officer last night, and he says, after the fires at the weekend, he says, has nobody told them we only have fires in the spring here for wildfire? We're stopped all that. And actually we don't. It's now starting to go a bit longer, and that is very challenging. And in a time when our public services don't have the funding we need, that's the importance of a national strategy, a prevention and education piece, and an awareness piece to everyone that this is an all year problem. And Pau Costa have been saying this since 2011. They've told us that this is going to start to move. Well, in the day has told us how it's going to move from spring to summer fires for us. You know, it's something we need to be addressing now if we don't want it to be a problem in the next 20-25 years, you know.
Okay, we've a follow-up comment from M. Bruce. Summer fires will tend to start once more than 50% curing of grasses occurs. Mosses don't have roots to react to any drought, spring or summer. From videos, it appeared that the Manchester fires were driven by the moss and litter there, so the grass was still green and it still burned. And then we've got another one here from Letitia Koprowski. How is the wildlife management during prescribed burnings, domestic animals grazing and fire suppression?
I suppose so it's wildlife management. The timing that we would do this would be at a time when there was no nesting birds or breeding mammals and that sort of thing. So we would tend to do it end of March, really. We would do a site run through to ensure to lift any potentially birds that were looking to start nesting and things like this, and to check that every day, for example. So yeah, we've been very particular and worked with Environment Agency on sort of what the parameters are around doing prescribed burning. And we would again do this at the end of, say, the winter, start spring, because you can control the fire and determine your fire impact a bit better, we find, than maybe if you do this in the late autumn when there's still quite a lot of moisture content in the ground. Maybe the plants might not burn in the way that you want quickly, they're more smolder. There's still quite a good damp humus layer in our landscapes at the end of March anyway, albeit the, say, heather stems and gorse stems are quite desiccated at that point, but you would still have quite a good lower wet humus layer to protect your soils and things like that. So yeah, we take quite a particular concern about that. And then the ongoing monitoring coming back afterwards, we would look and investigate the sites and that sort of thing. And then you compare that obviously to a wildfire. Now the Donald one was maybe a little bit earlier than when a lot of birds were nesting, but other fires we've seen, particularly summer fires, there's such huge impact on habitat and flora and fauna. So we're comparing the two, you know, of a very careful prescribed burn of a smaller area against what might happen in a wildfire at a time that you don't need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have another comment from Bruce. I think it's best, which is, it sounds very, very good. I think it's best to look at fuels in layers with
Yes.
different drivers for each fuel layer.
Don't think you're not going to get any argument from Matthew and me with Michael on this one. No, he's absolutely spot on.
You're on the same hymn sheet.
They are,
and we've a question from Miriam Crowley, and she said, would you give your opinion as to if there is any room anymore for controlling gorse by fire, even with a carefully controlled fire?
I suppose just the picture I showed earlier about the attempt that we'd had on 2-meter high gorse. Guillem, maybe in your environment you might find it might clear and burn better, but we find that it patch burns it really, even though you might be doing it at an opportune time in a dry period. So you're left then, you know, in effect with a dead tree stem or gorse stem, which is still going to carry fire and be much more prone to carry fire than if it had been left alive, I suppose. So in some cases we've been able to burn out gorse, and possibly, you know, where it's a lot shorter and more continuous. But the larger stands, they're very difficult. And we ended up then going in with chainsaws, Mark, with hand saws, and then ultimately, as you saw there, we brought in a very high cost mulcher head on a digger to take it out. So yeah, gorse is, it depends how big it is, how consistent, and where it is. The topography is an issue too. The Mournes is a very rocky topography, so I know in other areas they've used flail mowers and things like this to cut vegetation, but we can't really do that in the Mournes because the very difficult topography for us, rocky, constantly rocky and uneven. So bringing in a machine like that isn't really cost effective or effective generally, you know.
We have a fantastic machine, which is a remote controlled RoboCut, which we've been using in Sleeve Bay and on Culker fairly successfully for cutting vegetation. And because you don't have to have a driver on board and you can do it from, you know, a good distance away, it's much, much safer for the users. So that's something people might like to consider.
I think, Abby, the important part here is to answer Miriam's question. Yes, you can control with using fire, but I think once we say that, everybody wants to go out and use fire because it's everybody seems to enjoy lighting fires. I don't know what that is. I struggle with it as a firefighter sometimes, but I understand why. Or we can use moors, or we can use grazing, or we can use wetting of areas, or, you know, what the point I would like to really make is we need to have a toolbox, and we need to assess every situation. And not only do we need a toolbox, but we need everybody around the table when we're assessing that. So, for instance, when we go to do a prescribed burn, as Matthew said, or we decide on one of those control points that we talked about in the Mournes, we looked and seen what was the best tool to use. So we had Mournes Heritage Trust landowners were there, We had the Environment Agency there, Northern Ireland Water were there, we were there around the table. And it's only when we start to listen to that collective opinion, we start to understand each other's needs. And only then can we start to get this right. So yeah, Miriam, you can use fire, but it is only one of the tools. And to be honest, Matthew can tell you, I have very seldom used, I could almost count in two hands, the amount of times we've used prescribed burning or even control burning to control. So there's many other ways of doing it. Now we've done tests in Glenwherry, which is just northeast of Belfast, roughly, where we did some flash burns over the top of wet moss, and we did some flailing. And actually that test at that stage, and the Environment Agency was with us, the benefits were much better with using fire than it was used flailing, because flailing was going 2 or 3 inches into the moss, into the sphagnum moss and taking it. And the flame was just burning the vegetation on the top and burning away. So I think there's still a bit more research before we can do definitive, but I think it's about a risk assessment and using whatever tool you decide is the best from a joint approach.
Yeah.
This is Kieran's comment there, Abby.
Yeah. He says, Kieran says the combination of treatments can control gorse, but you have to tailor the combinations to specific sites. So it is very much site-specific solutions, and you have to know your sites.
Sorry, just to say too, you know, with the livestock, you know, we've tried to use the cattle to see if they can break down the vegetation, which is often what they do with their weight and their hoof, you know, impacts and things like this. Even, you know, opening up the vegetation to create a bit of space down into the soil for herbs and that to come back in, you know, which is good for landscape management. But the cattle were, you know, it's very bespoke, you know, it's very time intense looking after livestock in a particular way. Now I know you can use the collars now and all this sort of thing, so we're looking at doing that, and that's obviously something they're considering in Quilca, aren't they, Abby?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, the livestock to us going forward is something that we want to look at bringing in. But the issue that we've had is that for the I showed those pictures of what we've been doing in the Mournes, but there had been major issues between sustaining that management. As I say, it's very bespoke, it's high cost, but it's also, you know, between maybe the grazing regime contract that we'd have with Northern Ireland Water and that particular grazer, the regulations Department of Agriculture have, the funding available for this, all of that sort of thing needs to be reviewed, so we can, if we start something, we can sustain it, because that's what needs to happen. And what we've learned so far is there's been a lot of things we've tried, but we can't do everything and we can't keep doing them all. So we need to really focus down what the most successful things are going to be and do that, as Mark says, in that broader community discussion.
Right, that's great. We've kind of drifted into our panel session anyway, but we'll still continue to take questions on the Q&A function, and we'll just open up the 4 speakers there that we have, or 3 speakers there that we have, to just continue and to complete their discussions, and then we can have another Q&A session afterwards. So over to you, lads.
I think, Matthew, we don't need a comfort break or anything, Abby. We're okay. We'll just carry on.
I think we'll just carry on. Yes, with 20 minutes or so, and then a session, you know, question and answer, you know, during or after. Okay. As you've seen, folks, in the first 2 sessions, we have talked about the science behind it and the process that Guillem and Pau Costa are bringing into the project and the management plan. Matthew has given us an example over the last 10 years of how we have used a plan in the past and that journey we have had. And I'd like to take a bit of time now, hopefully only 10 minutes, and give another opportunity to ask questions. But I feel there's another element to wildfire management, which sometimes I think is missing and lacking, and it's an extremely essential piece that we need to grasp. And I think if we're going to go forward and deal with this issue that we have, which is a joint problem, we can only do it with a collective solution. And I'm just going to share my screen, Abby, if I can. Let's see. Should be able to. Yeah. Everybody see that okay? Yeah. Yeah, good. And so a collective solution that we want to look at, this was a fire we had a few years ago, as Michael talked about. I think it was 2018, up in the northeast of our country.
and we were at it for 5 or 6 days. Reasonably large gorse fire that we had, and dealing with it in extreme conditions, a summer fire like we had this weekend past, extremely challenging for the fire and rescue services Michael has talked about too. And so let me start the work from it. So our stakeholders would like to talk a wee bit about the engagement piece and the collaborative working that we do. And we have different departments within Northern Ireland. We have a devolved government. Within there, we have departments, and within that, then each of our organizations belong to different departments. So it needs to be an interdepartmental approach that we have. And our main agencies, as Matthew has talked about, our sponsoring agencies is Northern Ireland Water, Forestry, the Environment Agency, and ourselves. And I know for us, over the last few years, we've worked. I see Richard on with us today from the Environment Agency. Great to see you, Richard. We work very close together, trying to come up with this collaborative approach. And we have our Eastern Mournes Wildfire Project. We have our Northern Ireland Wildfire Stakeholder Group, which is now at departmental level, looking at the strategy, which we hope to have developed in the next 6 to 9 months with an action plan running out of it. And then we have this support of local wildfire groups, and that would be the governance around what we're looking for. And it's only then, once we get that set up and put in place, that we'll have this full collaborative approach to the problem of wildfire or land management, whatever way we look at it. So our National Wildfire Strategy, funded by the Department of Justice in 2018, to have a public consultation and a 2-day workshop. And the government departments and stakeholders and public were involved in this. And what that did for us was give us a platform, or give us data then to push forward with the strategic direction that we're looking at. And that gave us guidance for our stakeholder group going forward. So the base elements of it, it's only in draft form at the minute, and the Environment Agency are funding this and chairing the national group, which we co-chair with them as a fire service. But these are some of the basic elements we're looking at. It's almost a full service delivery model of prevention, protection, response, and resilience. And that word can mean a lot of things around preparedness and preparing the land to make sure it doesn't burn, preparing our resources, and then the learning and development of that joint response and joint training together. And that's the basis of the strategy we're looking at across Northern Ireland. And I really would cherish anybody's thoughts or opinions in that once we get the draft finished. Hopefully we'll put that out to consultation. I would love feedback from everyone here and wider in the wildfire world. Now, this is the element. The fire service belong to the health department here in Northern Ireland, and we very much have an ethos of a collective leadership approach to management of projects or management of any sort of issues. And if we start there at the independent collaborative systems leadership, that is working across all our systems, and we all have systems. And this is to break down the silo mentality of everybody in their own. So the issue I can see is we have firefighters, environmentalists, forestry, landowners, all different elements and agencies that all have their own needs and requirements. And quite often we go out in our own silos to fix those and don't work together. And it's only if we start to be collaboratively across our systems, and then actually leadership at all levels here, responsibility of everyone. We all need to take that responsibility. And then that shared leadership, as I've said, that it is played out for us because of this management plan in the Mournes, and hopefully into Quilca we'll be able to get it. And even more so, that cross-border all Irish approach to it could be really beneficial for future planning across the whole island. But the one thing I do want to concentrate on, and I do think it's very much missing, is this compassionate leadership. And compassionate leadership isn't about lifting that wee lamb and giving it a hug. It's not about that at all. It's actually about, and we break it down. And if we take this ethos on at the start of the project, then we start to understand there's nothing worse than standing on the side of a hillside, having a meeting, and landowners, environmentalists, foresters, fire service, farming union, all standing, arguing and fighting about their problems. So we do need to start to listen to each other, and only then when we start to listen with fascination. So it's about listening with fascination to each other's problems. I in the fire service 10 years ago, had no idea what importance there was to sphagnum moss. I didn't know what wet and dry heath was and why that was important to anybody. And as for millennia grass, I just thought it was big bits of grass that was running about there. I didn't know that sheep didn't like it when it was growing to, and so I didn't understand. So I just put fires out, sent everybody. But in 2018, the Environment Agency were with us. There was landowners with us. And when we went to make a decision of how we were going to fight this fire, we actually put a burn back down in Omagh in the southwest of the country. That was directed by the Environment Agency to protect 1,200 hectares of ASSI ground of this spreading to it. And they were very much within our decision-making process. Of course, we're still in charge of every fire, but it was listening to the Environment Agency and the landowners' issues with fascination that we then made an informed decision at that call. So it's really important from a response perspective, but also to transfer that into the education and awareness and preparedness part. So it's about understanding needs, and it gives you that educated, informed action. So it is only when we take a collective ownership and a complete buy-in by every agency that we're going to overcome the issues that we have had in the past and stop having our own independent silo mentality of we can't, Environment Agency, no, we can't touch anything, let it all grow wild. Fire service, cut everything. Landowners, we need, and we have everybody starting to argue and fight. We need to sit around the table and start to decide on a joint approach to this. So our strategy is looking at partnership, as I've said, across the 4 elements of the service delivery, and possibly it'll go down to 3, depending on what it looks like. But it's about interagency response, developing specialist skills and interagency training, which we have proved works very well, even to the large fire we had in the Mournes there in April past, with shared resourcing and community landowner engagement. I feel this is key. I know Michael had mentioned earlier about challenges for the fire service. I think there's even a bigger challenge about that pre-planning and preparedness and resilience building engagement with landowners and with agencies. And that is about building that resilience into our valuable landscapes. We have to all value our land. That is what this is about. And protecting our habitats and protecting our ecologies for the future of where we're going under this climate change that's coming, whether we accept it or not. So within that strategy, you can see there from the picture, we joint awareness. There's every agency there, forestry, landowners, Northern Ireland Water, and Northern Ireland Environment Agency, ourselves, all training together and working together. And you can see, I'm not going to read it out, you can see it there, as part of the roles and responsibilities of the national strategy. This is what we're trying to bring in to everyone. The interagency program for the wildfire group, you can see it. It's again just repeating what I'm already saying. But this national strategy, without this, as Matthew has said, personalities have driven this, passion has driven it, goodwill has driven this. But we're getting to a stage now, and we can see from Guillem's report earlier, this is coming running down at us like a train off a track. And we need to have a strategy. That strategy will provide guidance, will provide policy, but even more importantly, provide funding and direction then for us to support an educational piece and awareness piece and start to drive down the damage done by wildfires in our country and the cross-border liaison. So for me, it's about relationships. It's not just about out fighting fires. It's not just about out educating people. And sometimes this is myself. I went over to Catalonia where they do a lot of training. Guillem, I'll know where this is. I spent a couple of weeks in a fire station being educated by the experts in Europe about how to deal with this. And they feed you well in Catalonia. This you'll see here. We've got Alex from Germany, Craig from Wales, Matthew as a major landowner in the Mournes, Colin from the Environment Agency, myself sitting out. I know we're socializing, but there wasn't much talked about except the Mournes report over that meeting, if I remember right, Matthew. It was good planning going forward. And here's just working together. And this is what it's all about with Pau Costa. And Kieran will know, Kieran Nugent from Ireland, who invited us down for lessons learned from 2015. And many good things learned from that. Cross-border Irish Air Corps come and dropping water for us in Northern Ireland, some of our large fires, and that air-to-ground communications worked really well. And Kieran will know that that's starting to be adopted across the whole island. So lessons learned is important. And you'll see Matthew here, we've seen this picture, working with our ecologists, working with our landowners, and trying to demonstrate the impact of fire and how do we control it. The question was asked earlier, can we do it in a controlled way? This is how we train and we work together in a very safe environment before we actually even go out onto the mountain to do it. So what are the benefits? We will be able to risk assess where we need to go and put the right resources to it at the right time. We have an innovative wildfire response, which is a joint response this year in Donard in the Mournes. It came together with 15 agencies all working together. Shared resources. Environment Agency last year has provided the fire service with a very large amount, and I'm talking about going into hundreds of £1,000s worth of equipment to go out and fight fires together. Mournes Heritage Trust have an Argo Cat and they fight fires with us as well. And so multi-agency response, a raised awareness among everyone, improved communications, which as I was saying with Kieran Nugent in Ireland that we do together, and that enhanced landowner engagement has to be, because actually our landowners are the folks who are going to be actually probably doing the gist of the work here and the most of the work to control this. And a better future, if we can do that. Again, here's a landowner working with the fire service, actually having I think they're having a sausage and a tin of beans there at one of our wildfires. You can see behind us working together. And these are some of the elements we think will be needed running out of the strategy. That's the agencies working together now. So you've seen earlier, Matthew sent it up. There was about 5 agencies, and over the 10 years we have got to this. And this is what the Northern Ireland Wildfire Stakeholders Group at that level below the departmental level work together to try and deal with this problem. And so I think that's probably us, Abby, on that. I know it was a bit of a quick run through, but it's about that collective leadership approach to wildfire. I'm not sure if Matthew's got or Guillem's got anything to add.
Yeah, we've just got one question which I think would be specific to you there, Mark. Hans Visser asked, when a wildfire starts, who is leading the fire management response for the duration of the fire, and how do you ensure a consistent approach in managing the fire while dealing with various firefighting crews during the day or the entire fire event? Okay, so under our legislation of the Fire Services Order, any fires, we take full control of it and we manage the inner cordon of it. So each fire is managed by the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service in Northern Ireland. That's our statutory obligation to do so, to answer that. Then on the other one, I mean, we have got what we call an incident command structure or system, which came out, I think, originated in 1968 from Ventura County Fire Service in California, due to the wildfire management there of the challenges of keeping people safe at these large incidents. So we have a very clear system we use, a very disciplined system that we use, and it's important that we put that in place right at the very initial stage of any gorse fire or wildfire. Now, here's the exciting thing for us. Actually, Matthew, some of Matthew's team, some of the Environment Agency, some of Northern Ireland Water have actually come, and we have done some training in and around our incident management system. And so when they turn up to the incident, now what we have is everyone comes through our control point, and then we send them out safely together with fire service personnel to ensure the safety of everyone at this incident. And that's the exciting piece for me about the joint response, that we are working together whilst we all have different roles and responsibilities at a fire. That leadership role very much lies within the fire service here in Northern Ireland. That's great. And one question here from Emma. The Canary Islands Environmental Department have a holistic approach to wildfire management, which includes fire education in classrooms from preschool onwards. Would you consider this embedded educative approach an ambition of future strategic directions? I would say yes.
Absolutely. And if you could share anything like that with us, I would be all ears for it. I know Belfast tells. So with different issues, okay. So in lots of our areas we have, how do you put it? And some of those more rural areas, it's more probably either arson or land management issues or whatever, or fires that have been controlled, that have got out of control, and the landowner has phoned us and we've turned up and we're putting the fire out and working very much together, and that's been a great piece. But then you take a Belfast Hills who's got an urban interface. And they're very much much more of an arson issue, and it's about an education program. And I know Belfast Hills, I don't know if Jim's on today or not, but Belfast Hills very much have had a schools education program and a teenager education program and a community education program that they use. So yes, to answer the question, we see that very much in our strategy under the prevention, awareness and education piece of the strategy. But definitely I'm all ears. If somebody's got a wheel somewhere else, I would rather not reinvent the wheel, and we'll certainly have a look at the Canary Islands. Just please get in touch. We'd be very willing to have a look at that. Abby, that's great. That's a super question. Thank you.
I just comment on that, Abby.
Yep.
I think that's that, Mark, you pointed out the differences of circumstances and where maybe you need to prioritize depending on your local area circumstances. And for the Mournes, given that we were dealing with a remote landscape, the landowner dynamic that we had and the priorities that we'd had coming from the report, the sort of education side was seen with the resources we had and the time and the as not as high a priority as some of the other actions that we needed to learn on very quickly. So it's not to say that, say in the Mournes, that's not something that we would be continuing on with more coordinated, but we had to cherry pick, for want of a phrase. But no, and the other thing is, somebody in a different area like Belfast is, they're leading on in effect that education side, as you say, Mark, and we've learned from them and we're watching what they're doing, and then similarly they're seeing us. So you don't all have to do the same thing.
Yeah, I see Lizzie has answered that. Sorry, Lizzie, I didn't realize you were here. Really good to have you. I don't know if Lizzie wants to maybe speak about the education program. I don't know if we can do that or not, Abby, but
if she raised her hand, I believe I can do that. I believe.
Lizzie has been working very hard. I know her and Jim very hard in that area.
Right. No, I can't. Oh, hold on, attendees. Sorry, this is just starting to me here. So I'm allowing Lizzie to talk now. If you'd like to have a word, Lizzie, about that, I'd be very interested.
Unmute, Lizzie, just in case.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I think I've unmuted myself. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you.
Great to be along. Really interesting webinar. So yeah, Belfast Hills, as you mentioned, because of our location, we're just so close to the urban interface. And realistically, most of our fires are caused by young people bored, looking for something to do, looking for a bit of excitement, heading up to the hills. So we have been working for at least the last 9 years, if maybe not a bit more, with the schools, particularly those on the very edge of the urban interface with the hills, because realistically those are the ones that are just walking up. So we've done lots of things trying to be as creative as possible. We've created films that the young people themselves have written and starred in and directed, and obviously that got quite a lot of peer-to-peer messaging across. We've done talks to assemblies. We've had groups out doing things like John Muir's, and just really connecting them to the sites, getting them excited about what's on their own doorstep and helping them to see the positive things of what's there, as opposed to just going, oh, it's a bit of a wasteland that I can burn and have a bit of crack. That if they actually understand, no, actually it's a home for lots and lots of things, then they come to respect it. As I mentioned in the wee chat, I think our numbers have reduced in terms of wildfire. Some of the fires that happen now are bigger in scale, but in terms of the sheer number of fires, we used to have lots and lots of fires, whereas now the number has definitely come down. I'm not completely sure if we can say that's because of our education program, but we'd like to think that has had a significant factor in that. And it is something that just is ongoing and something that we've got to keep going on with. But yeah, I completely think education is one of the key elements that we need to be doing.
That's super, Lizzie. Yes, and I think it's great. And from our perspective as a fire service, it really is of great benefit to us from resourcing, keeping our resources where we need them rather than walking over mountains and being in towns and going to RTCs and helping people. And this program that you have been running, and I know how effective it has been. And I will go on record and saying that I think, and we know from our fire safety programs that we do, education does reduce the risk, and absolutely, Lizzie, it's been a super program that you have been doing there in Belfast Hills, and a great example to everyone of how it needs to be done. So no, thank you for that. That was super.
Great, thanks, Mark. And just maybe a point to mention that again, it is partnership work. And like as when I said, look, we did a small film, actually, the fire brigade were really supportive. We had some of the young people came and interviewed some of the firemen and talked to them about it. And we got loaned a uniform from some of the actors that were pretending to be firemen in the film and stuff. So again, it's about working together. So yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions then, folks, at all about the collective approach or the collaborative approach to the management of our wildfire plans?
I do think that what we've seen though is the limitations of limited funding and project-based funding, which has, you do fantastic work for 5 years and then the money's gone and you can't carry it on. And that's going to be a problem until we get a national and international strategic, well-funded response.
But I think that is the challenge, Abby, is that when we're doing this project and we're looking at this project is about the sustainability of that project. And what we're finding is we don't have the funding to do everything, but between ourselves, the Environment Agency, the sponsoring of Mournes Heritage Trust and groups like that, between us all, there is that opportunity to almost fund everything we need to do, because some different agencies can get different funding for different things. And that's really, really important that if we don't get this collaborative piece at the start, right, then we can miss out on a lot of that joint funding and joint resourcing and joint working together. It's so important. I think actually it's probably one of the most, if not the most important element of any wildfire management planning or project is starting off working together and helping each other,
That's fantastically positive. I love that. it can work.
Oh yeah.
I'd say, Abby, as well, we mentioned earlier, this is one of a wide range of land management issues and scenarios given climate change and all this. So it's not just fire, it's many other things, holding carbon sequestration, all that sort of thing. But the techniques and the approaches that we're looking at tend to be similar. And I think, obviously we're all looking at, nature-based solutions and green recovery, particularly after COVID, as well, which is also for with a view to the economy as well. And I think that's the thing where we've got the opportunity now, because everybody's very focused on that. Again, going back to even particular things like using livestock back in areas where they would have traditionally been used, or land management, given, like you said, about maybe trying to reinvest in that. So it's how you use agricultural policy and all this sort of thing, which everybody in this attendees I can see is very much involved in as well. So, it's quite an exciting period now. And I think we have been given an indication that they'll take things forward strategically for the wildfire, which is brilliant. But we're very aware with all the other organisations that it is that wider scenario of land management as well. And just to say also, Northern Ireland Water, if they do take forward this new holistic land management approach for their water catchment, that's innovative for a utilities body over here. It's the first time ever, and it will include all the elements we've been talking about there at the end. So on wildfire will be very key within that. So, it's quite exciting period, but we need that policy and resources.
Yeah, and Kieran agrees there. He says a good plan strategy should be capable of operation without funding within a collective partnership. Again, the strength of what Mark was saying about working together. This has been our experience in Ireland, he says, so that's really good to hear. And I think we've got one more question or comment from Gareth Berham. Especially in the context of future climate change, is there an argument that we urgently require governmental funded support for a dedicated national wildfire response, which can then support local response units? Any comments on that? Come on.
Go on, Mark.
I better unmute first. That's always easier. But yes, Gareth, I think part of the answer to that would be yes, but it still takes that collaborative approach, as Kieran has mentioned there too. It takes lots of things. There's a toolbox for that as well. And yes, I think we do need to take, and I think governments are starting to take climate change a bit more seriously. We are starting to see wildfire in the UK now sitting on our national risk register. And when they start, and this is how governments work, and we know this how funding works, that as we sit in the risk register and the risks are high, then we start to put more funding to it to mitigate those risks and drive them down. So as it drives forward, climate change feeds into that, historical data and the rise in incidents start to drive into that too. That starts to impact it all. And yes, we can do so much, but yes, it does take funding to get it right and to push it forward for us, because a lot of us are doing it, as I would always say in the fire service, on our day off job, and with lots of goodwill and lots of passion. But it eventually gets to a stage where you do need to be funding these programs and funding to drive down the risk nationally and locally. But you're right, Gareth, I think local groups is the way forward. Matthew and I have talked about this in many different ways. How do we do that? How do we have that initial response? How do we do it safely? How do we train people properly? And we know that happens in other places around the world. But at the moment, Northern Ireland anyway, it is a response which is led and done by Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. But we have moved on a lot in 10 years, as Matthew has evidenced today with his programme for the journey that we've done. But no, good question. Thank you. It really was. Thanks.
So any other comments or questions, queries or stories that anyone would like to share? Got one more coming. Oh, it's just Gareth saying thank you. Okay, well, I've learned loads. So I think I apologise to those who didn't manage to catch up with the new link. I can only apologise for that. That was unforeseen circumstances that forced us to do that. But I'm really pleased that, you know, a good 40 or so people managed to benefit from this. What I will be doing is we have a recording of the whole programme, and I will be putting that on the CAN project YouTube site. And I will send the link to that out to everybody who had gone through Eventbrite and bought a ticket, as it were. So that recording will be available for everybody, even the ones that didn't manage to negotiate through our change of venue. And I'd just like to thank our speakers. It's been very, very interesting. And I think there is a huge potential for further seminars, webinars, either in person or online. It's been really good to see people coming together today. You know, through the online platform, it enables people to actually not have to travel, not to take so much time to discuss these things. And there are limitations to the online world, but there are also benefits. And we've had people here that we couldn't have had if we'd had a meeting in a village hall or a hotel somewhere in the north of Ireland or in the south. So there is a real good potential for these kind of meetings to continue being online. And thank you everybody for turning up. And unless there's any other questions, we'll say goodbye. And again, once more, thanks to the Interreg PA programme for funding this series of events.
Thanks for Pau Costa for hosting this in the end.
Yeah, in the end, yes.
No, thank you. Brilliant, Colin. Thank you, and thank you, Abby, for actually managing this and planning it. And I know it was tough enough getting it this morning. So thank you very much. It was super. That's went very well.
Yeah, my nightmares at 3 o'clock in this morning were foundless in the end.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, so I've asked our friendly IT from Pau Costa to record that and to stop recording that. So
okay, yeah, I'm gonna stop now.
Brilliant.
Now, yeah,
thank you so much for your help.
No worries. Good webinar. Okay, now stop.